Kambala, the Yogin of the Black Blanket. Within the ocean's silent depths lies treasure untold. How marvelous the enjoyment of the Naga kings! Within all light and all sound lies the Dharmakaya. How rich the enjoyment of the adept! After his father's death, the new king of Kankarama assumed the throne. He then sent for his mother to ask for her wise counsel, but she was nowhere to be found. They searched the palace high and low, to no avail. She had simply disappeared. Despite the weight of his double loss, the king was forced to turn his thoughts to the management of his kingdom. And within a short time, his virtue and wisdom had brought great prosperity to the 84,000 households of his realm. Then, after 2 years had passed, the Queen Mother suddenly reappeared at court. Her son was overjoyed as he approached the throne. But when he saw the tears in her eyes, his joy turned to sadness. "Beloved mother, why are you crying?" asked the king. "I weep to see you sitting on this throne, engaging in the wretched business of government," she replied. The young king rose from the throne, removed the crown from his head, and embraced his mother. "Then I will abdicate in favor of my brother and take holy orders," he declared, for his only thought was to please her. Within the week he took up residence in a monastery, accompanied by a retinue of 300 monks. After a time, his mother appeared to him again, and again she was weeping. He prostrated himself before her and begged her to explain the cause of her distress. "Even though you have become a monk, I weep to see you still living like a king surrounded by a court." "What would you have me do?" he asked. "Leave this monastery and all its luxury," she said. "Leave your retinue of monks and go into the jungle alone and meditate." Once more he followed her instructions. He went into the jungle and took up residence in the shelter of a sturdy tree. However, the local villagers soon became aware of his presence. Grateful for his past generosity, they fed him the finest foods and supplied many things for his comfort. Once again his mother appeared before him, beating her breast and weeping violently. And once again the Yogin king begged to know the cause of her displeasure. Pointing to his silk robes and silver hand basin, she said sternly, "What need has a holy man for all these trappings?" Abandoning his luxurious jungle retreat and the tender care of his subjects, he took the path of the Yogin, wandering from land to land. Before he had gone far, his mother appeared yet again. However, this time she was floating above him. She was floating above him in mid-air, and he recognized at last her true Dakini nature. She gave him the Samvara initiation and instructed him in meditation. Then she vanished from sight. The Yogin king wandered from place to place for 12 years. He slept in cremation grounds and practiced his sadhana until he attained Mahamudra Siddhi. He levitated into the sky, and there he found himself face to face with his mother and all her heavenly retinue. "Why are you indulging your power in this useless fashion?" she asked angrily, her eyes still swollen from weeping. "Why are you not using your gifts for the benefit of those below?" The master floated back down to earth and, intent upon selfless service, travelled to Mangalapur, the capital of Odiyana, which lay in the realm of the Dakinis. Outside the city of 250,000 households, in the area of Karabir, he came upon the wild and lonely Panaba cliffs. In the cliff wall he found a cave, and this became his retreat. In time, it came to be called Talatse, Palm Top Cave. However, once he took up residence, some new and much less benevolent female elements entered his life. It seems his presence threatened the power of a band of local Dakini witches and their queen, Padma Devi. In council, they decided to launch a campaign that would interfere with his meditation and make his life so miserable he would be forced to move on. One day, dressed in the black blanket that was his sole covering, he set out for town to beg food. On the road he was accosted by a bevy of the beautiful young witches. "Please come home with us," they cried imploringly. "We'd be so honored to feed you. That way you wouldn't have to go all the way to town." "It's not my custom to take my food from only one household," he replied politely. "Well, if you won't come home with us," Padma Devi wheedled, "will you lend us your blanket while you're gone?" Too kindly to refuse her request, he gave her the blanket and, totally naked, continued into town. As soon as he had disappeared over the hill, the witches began to laugh with glee and dance madly about with the yogin's blanket. Then Padma Devi called another council. "The Siddha is a man of power," she said. "Therefore, all his possessions must also partake of his power. How shall we share it between us?" They decided that they must eat the blanket then and there, and they began to tear it into tiny bits. In a trice they had consumed it all, with the exception of one corner, which they threw into the fire. On his way home from town, the master inquired politely if he might have his blanket back. The witches, of course, could not do this, so they offered him a beautiful new blanket instead. But no, this would not do. The yogin insisted upon having his very own blanket. They tried offering him gold. Again, he refused. Furious, he returned to town to complain to the king. Recounting the tale of his lost blanket, he insisted that the king forced the thieving witches to return his property. The king summoned the witches and demanded that they give the yogin back his blanket. They pleaded that it was no longer in their possession and that they had offered the yogin compensation for it, which he had refused. What more could the king do? The blanket was simply not to be had. Naked, the master returned to his cave to continue his meditation. There he offered a torma, a sacrificial cake, to the Dakini Vajavarahi, consort of Heruka, to propitiate the elemental spirits. Later, when one of the witches cast a spell that caused the spring in his cave to dry up, he was able to command the earth goddess to restore it. Instantly, fresh sweet water bubbled forth from his spring. On and on went the petty annoyances, but the master was unconcerned and always managed to set right whatever mischief the witches conjured up. Frustrated, his tormentors decided to hold a great congress of Dakini witches in hopes that their concerted power would defeat the master. Witches came from far away, as Mount Meru and the four continents, to the great convocation in Odiyana. But the master got wind of what was going on, and he hatched a counterplot of his own. Waiting until they had all gathered about their queen, Padmadevi, he chanted a very powerful mantra that turned them into the least harmful form he could devise, a flock of sheep. Bleating piteously, Padmadevi entreated him to return them to their original shapes. He agreed, but took the precaution of sharing them all first. When the witches returned to their human forms, they discovered their heads had been shaved bald. Once more, the master found himself in a storm of feminine weeping. Infuriated at this insult to her power, the goddess of sensuality struck another blow for her side. Casting one of her strongest spells, she called up a great wind that dislodged an enormous boulder from the top of the cliffs and sent it hurtling down upon Palm Top Cave. The master surveyed the oncoming monolith with great calm, and when it was nearly upon him, he simply raised his hand in a gesture of warning. Instantly, the huge rock came to a halt, balancing precariously on an outcropping just above the entrance to his cave. It remains there to this very day. The war between the master and the witches had brought the business of the kingdom to a halt. No one felt safe, for who knew what could happen next? Perhaps a great earthquake or a flood. Perhaps fire would rain from the sky. Finally, the king decided to put an end to this disturbance, and he summoned both the master and Padmadevi's troublemaking witches to his court. Stern and majestic upon his throne, the king observed the witches in silence for some time. At last he said, "There is not one among you who has not harmed at least one of my male subjects at some time or another. You must now beg forgiveness and vow to follow the path of virtue." The witches simply laughed at him and remained totally unrepentant. But then the master, in a voice like thunder, hurled his imprecation at the gathering. "Vow to protect the truth, or I will send you this very instant to Dhamaraja, Lord of Death." In fear and trembling, the witches vowed to do as they were told. Fixing them with his piercing gaze, the master warned, "Should any of you contemplate breaking your vow, in even the smallest of infractions, you will be transformed upon the instant into a cart horse." Knowing the master was good as his word, the witches took refuge in the Buddha, swearing to abide by his precepts. When they were given a ceremony of purification, they all vomited up scraps of the master's blanket they had consumed before. Happy to have his one piece of clothing returned to him, he gathered up all the scraps and sewed them back together again, except, of course, for one small corner, for the piece that had been thrown into the fire was gone forever. This great Yogin became known far and wide as Kambala, master of the blanket, and also as Sri Prabhat, glorious light. After many peaceful years of selfless service to humanity, he was assumed bodily into the paradise of the Dakinis. Nimo delek sendele, nime gumyan delek shin, ninsentado delek bel, conjo somgi jingilo, conjo somgi ngodropso, conjo somgi tashi sho. At dawn or dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with the various signs of auspiciousness.